Kia ora koutou. Ko Francis o, ko te whānau a Apanui, taku iwi. Nā ku te Jane Austen Society o Aotearoa, I whakatu. Hi everyone, I'm Francis. I'm the founder of the Jane Austen Society of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Today I'm talking about whether Charlotte Lucas from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice could be a romantic. We'll talk a bit about what a romantic means, what Jane Austen meant when she said romantic, and whether it's possible. Meet Charlotte Lucas. She is 27. Her intimate friend is Elizabeth Bennet. We would use the term best friend. Bear in mind that Elizabeth Bennet is 6 years younger than her. That is a huge age gap. Their friendship significantly changes when Charlotte accepts a proposal from Elizabeth's cousin, Mr. Collins, proposal previously made to Elizabeth that she refused. Here is how Charlotte explains her decision, part of the reason that she explains her decision to Elizabeth, and the sentence that is the basis for this presentation.
I'm not romantic, you know. I never was.
Charlotte says she's not romantic, but does that mean she's aromantic? And what does aromantic even mean? Is it missing a space in there? The Kinsey Scale was kind of revolutionary. It plotted people on a graph from heterosexual relationships to homosexual relationships, and in the middle, bisexual behaviour. But what's important to note is that this scale is about sexual behaviour, not identity. People used to think that your behaviour dictated your sexuality, and that who you had sexual relations with were people you were also romantically attracted to. Your sexual and romantic attraction were assumed to be one and the same. Now we understand that there's a split attraction model. Your romantic and sexual attractions may not always line up. You can be romantically attracted to some people and sexually attracted to others, potentially. Following the same sort of scale as the Kinsey Scale, though note that this is flipped. Romantic orientation goes from same gender to different gender, and then more genders in the middle. You'll note that this one has romantic orientation at the top and then sexual orientation at the bottom. The same different gender thing goes actually under both of those headings, romantic and sexual orientation. The second line under romantic orientation is aromantic to alloromantic. So what you would think of as average, the word is here, is alloromantic, so people who feel romantic attractions. And on the other end of the scale is aromantic, and that's people who tend to feel little or no romantic attraction. The same is true for the sexual orientation scale, goes from asexual to allosexual. Allosexual again falling under the average sexual attraction, as is understood. Reiterating again, aromantic is someone who does not or really feels romantic attraction. I identify as aromantic. A lot of the information in this presentation is from years of reading up to understand who I am. So, is Charlotte Lucas aromantic? Could we argue that she is? We need to look at what romantic means when she says, I'm not romantic. The Oxford English Dictionary, super useful for not only understanding what words mean now, but what they used to mean. As you can see, it has a lot of definitions and specific examples to back those up. These are definitions that would have been current in Jane Austen's time. From 1650 on, romantic of narrative work of fiction meant having the nature or qualities of a romance. Language or style was suitable for romance, 1653. Especially overblown, euphoristic, and flowery tends to be reusage now. From 1654, romantic was used to refer to a statement, story, or character. Fictitious, invented, having no foundation in fact. 1659, an idea or plan that is fantastic, extravagant, going beyond what is customary or practical, and of a person or personality given to or characterized by such ideas, responsive to the promptings of imagination or fancy, regardless of practicality. That doesn't sound like Marianne Dashwood. 1755, that gives free rein to the imagination, indulging fancy or fantasy, fanciful, sentimental, idealistic. It carries on. The changes in definition don't come till after Austen's time. 1866, demonstrating feelings of love and tenderness, given to impulsive acts of romanticism, affection, amorous, loving, affectionate. 1885, desirous of or wanting love and romance. And then 1907, of a story, novel, film having a love or love affair as its subject. This points out that Austen would not refer to her novels as romances in the way that we would consider them romances. Very important for a quote that comes later. Octavia Cox of Oxford University said on a podcast, which I'll link below, the opposite of romance really is realism. If we go through Austen's text, we can see where she uses the term romance and romantic to understand her meaning. In Sense and Sensibility, she says that Margaret had imbibed a good deal of Marianne's romance, and this is following the paragraph talking about the agony of grief which overpowered Marianne and her mother. Mrs. Dashwood's romantic delicacy is referred to by Eleanor, who thinks that her mother's generosity is overstrained considering her sister's youth. So her mother thinks she shouldn't be asking whether Marianne is actually engaged, and Eleanor thinks that's not the best idea. The longer quote says that common sense, common care, and common prudence were all sunk in Mrs. Dashwood's romantic delicacy. When Fanny Dashwood comes to Norland, it upsets Mrs. Dashwood's sense of honour and a generosity so romantic that any offence was a source of immovable disgust. When Colonel Brandon asks Eleanor if Marianne believes in second attachments, Eleanor says her opinions are all romantic, even though she herself is the product of a second attachment. Her mother is her father's second wife. In Pride and Prejudice, the word romance does not occur. The only occurrence of romantic is Charlotte saying, I am not romantic, and following on to say, I ask only a comfortable home. In Mansfield Park, Mary Crawford refers to Henry as quite the hero of an old romance, and glories in his chains to Fanny. Fanny recognises that her uncle, Sir Thomas, is without romantic delicacy because he married his daughter to Mr. Rushworth. It is a practical choice to have married her to him. In Emma, Harriet talks about The Romance of the Forest, a novel she wants her boyfriend to read. It's a gothic novel, and we all know Austen's opinion of those. Just look at Northanger Abbey. Emma has no romantic expectations of extraordinary virtue from the poor people she visits to give charity. She doesn't think they have to be deserving poor. In Northanger Abbey, Catherine realises that the visions of romance were over when Henry discovers her wild ideas about his father. It's not that her romance with Henry is over, it's Henry has opened her eyes to the extravagance of her late fancies. Austen refers to Henry being in love with Catherine as a new circumstance in romance because he loves her because of her partiality for him. It gave him a reason to give her serious thought. Mr. and Mrs. Morland don't suffer any romantic alarm on Catherine getting a carriage 12 hours by herself. In Persuasion, Anne learned romance as she grew older. She was prudent in her youth, so romance is kind of the opposite of prudence in this. The description of Lyme talks about romantic rocks. That's not helpful for this argument. In Lady Susan, Frederica is referred to as busy pursuing the plan of romance begun at Langford. It follows on to say she's falling in love with Reginald de Courcy, but I suspect that what she means by romance is the drama of not following her mother's wishes. Lady Susan refers to herself as romantic in not getting Sir James to propose to her. I have more than once repented that I did not marry him myself, and were he but 1 degree less contemptibly weak, I certainly should. But I must own myself rather romantic in that respect, and that riches only will not satisfy me. It's very pragmatic. I could marry this guy and twist him round my little finger, but I need more than that. She refers to Frederica's love of Reginald, idle love, as romantic nonsense. And Alicia agrees, telling Lady Susan to leave Frederica to punish herself for indulging that romantic tender-heartedness. So Frederica is not thinking with her brain when it comes to her feelings. All of these usages seem to line up reasonably well with the definition from the OED, and as Octavia Cox puts it, the opposite of romance is realism. In summary, let's place a few of those quotes in context. In Sense and Sensibility, Mrs. Dashwood's romantic delicacy is compared to common sense and common prudence. Romantic opinions are compared to reality. In Mansfield Park, romantic delicacy is referred to in regards to marrying Maria to Mr. Rushworth, lack of romantic delicacy. It's interesting that Austen uses romantic delicacy both in regards to children's relationships. Too much in Mrs. Dashwood's case, so she's not getting involved to check whether Marianne is being safe. Not enough in Sir Thomas's case, that again, he's putting his daughter into a not safe situation. In Emma, romantic expectations referred to as extraordinary. It's also romance used in the title of a Gothic novel. In Northanger Abbey, Catherine's visions of romance are referred to as fancies. The new circumstance in romance is actually referring to the type of novel that it is, which is not the same way that we would think of as romance. Persuasion is an outlier with its romantic frocks, but it also has romance compared to Prudence. Lady Susan is perhaps the wildest example. You could see most of those references referring to romance or romantic in our sense. Frederica falling in love with Reginald de Courcy, Lady Susan romantically choosing not to marry just for money, indulging romantic tender-heartedness because of her feelings for Reginald, but based on the other definitions, it's unlikely that those are what these mean. Aromantic means someone who does not, or very rarely, feels romantic attraction. The definition of aromantic that I've been using thus far is from I Am Ace by Cody Diagle-Oriens. They identify as asexual. He's also aromantic. And I think it's important to use terminology from the people who identify under those labels. The Oxford English Dictionary defines aromantic as a person who does not experience or express feelings of romantic attraction or attachment. But note that this definition came in 2012, so this is a relatively very recent word. But romantic in Austen's novels doesn't necessarily refer to romantic feelings as we think of them. It's more about adventure or the opposite of practicality. So if we're looking at it from a purely definitive sense, we couldn't say that Charlotte Lucas is aromantic. How would Charlotte identify? You might say, of course, Charlotte Lucas is straight. There weren't lesbians or asexual, aromantic people in Jane Austen's time. There probably weren't people that were using those labels, no, because the term straight, as related to sexually or romantically attracted to people of the opposite sex, didn't come into being until over 100 years after Jane Austen died. How does Charlotte Lucas feel? That's something we don't know. Austen doesn't let us into her inner world. We know she doesn't think much of men or matrimony, so maybe she wasn't attracted to men. But also, there are a lot of women who are attracted to men, don't think great things about them. A lot has been made of her friendship with Elizabeth. I'm sure you've read some of the fan fiction around that. The short answer is, we don't know. Something that stands out clearly in my memory is playing Marrying Mr Darcy. And the person I was playing with, even though they were playing the Charlotte character, specifically chose not to marry Mr Collins, which if you've played the game, you know it's to your advantage to marry him, you get more points, because it was Mr Collins. We find him so repellent that we want to avoid him so much, even if it's to your advantage. Marriage was necessary for both men and women. Men needed a housekeeper and women needed a roof over their head. And both, in theory, were required to stay inside the bounds of propriety when it came to sexual relations. Charlotte's reasons for marriage are devoid of affection. Hers are driven by necessity. She requires a home. She holds no affection for Mr Collins. Marriage has always been her object, because for a well-educated young woman of small fortune such as herself, it was the pleasantest preservative from want. When I was younger, I did not understand Charlotte Lucas, but as I've gotten older, I better understand her decisions. And I think it was the right one in her circumstances. She doesn't have a lot of money to tempt a husband. She doesn't have beauty. Mrs Bennet constantly reminds us that she's very plain. And she's not as young as Elizabeth either. At 27, you could argue that she is on the shelf and she has no way to earn her own keep. She'd be in the precarious position of relying on her brothers to support her, which, as we know from Sense and Sensibility, brothers do not always live up to what is expected of them. In Mansfield Park, the only piece of advice that Lady Bertram gives Fanny Price is that it is every young woman's duty to accept such a very unacceptable offer of marriage. Charlotte may not love Mr. Collins, but she is behaving correctly by the rules of the society she lives in. And Elizabeth, by refusing him, is not. Charlotte says, "I'm not romantic, you know. I never was." It may indicate she's aware she's unlikely to create feelings in a male, and so has instead chose to look for a practical relationship. Marriages were often more of a business arrangement than a love match, and it could work well for someone who was aromantic. They could go into that with their eyes wide open. It's nice to think that instead of a choice due to circumstance, Charlotte may have found a way to express her true aromantic self within the constraints of her society. If Charlotte is aromantic, she's found a way to function within her society to her advantage. It could be argued that aromanticism during that time period was a bonus. You wouldn't risk your reputation or happiness by falling in love with an inappropriate person. Maybe I'd like Charlotte Lucas to be aromantic for representation reasons. We haven't seen her have attractions in any of the adaptations, so perhaps we could headcanon her as aromantic. So is Charlotte Lucas aromantic? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I've done my best to list the sources in the notes as well. Talk soon. If you'd like to know more about me, there are links for that in the notes as well. Thanks for listening, and please check out the other offerings at Virtual JaneCon, a radically inclusive Jane Austen conference by fans for fans.